You know, I thought my wife would be happy when I retired, but she says retirement so far equals half the income and 3 times the husband. So here I am alone walking down through this field, checking to see what I can find. You never know. I mean, it's always possible that you're going to come across something. If I lived near a beach, maybe I could find like hidden treasure. But out here, I mean, what is there to find? Still, wait. Well, look at that. I can't believe it. Now, this could really be something. Oh, boy. Oh, imagine what it would be like all of a sudden to have all this money. Maybe I shouldn't tell my wife, or I could just surprise her. We could get us a convertible car, one of them 2-seaters, and drive down the road with the wind whipping through her hair. This could be the answer to all of our problems. Wait a minute. There's something written on the back of this thing. It says, made in Taiwan. There's a little creek that runs down there. I think I'll run down there and see what I can find. I've got to find something. You would think after all this time, with this technology, I would be able to find something. If I just had just one good coin or something. Just think what we could do with the money. If I had more money, all my problems could be solved. Wait, what's that? In our first lesson, we got to explore the question of whether or not we can have meaning or purpose or significance as people without figuring out how God relates to all that. In this lesson, we take on the question of pleasure as a pursuit of life. It's an intriguing question. If you think back to our skit with the guy walking around trying to find that one thing that was going to make him happy, Solomon wants to present the larger question of, can we be happy? Can we find significance in life by pursuing pleasure? In other words, is pleasure as a pursuit something worth giving our lives to? In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 1, he takes up this question as we read through the first 3 verses. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Again, Solomon gives us a context for thinking about the pursuit of pleasure. We saw before the phrase, under the sun. Now we have the phrase, under heaven. The 2 phrases mean the same thing. Looking at life just as we can observe it on planet Earth, from our own human perspective. What do we give our lives to? What do we spend our energies on? And so Solomon says, aha, perhaps it's pleasure. Maybe it's finding joy, having a good time, meeting the needs of our senses, so to speak. Well, he wants us to explore that line of reasoning with him here in the 2nd chapter. And he says, it's the question of defining what is the good life. Now, Solomon is in a wonderfully unique position to pursue the good life because being a king and having access to wealth and all the sort of things that make the good life possible from a human perspective, he's able to sort of present for us an experiment, if you will. In fact, he presents it in terms of an experiment where he says that he's going to apply his wisdom, his understanding, which was a special gift of his, to look at the question of whether or not pleasure was something worth pursuing. And he begins by examining a couple basic issues. One is the issue of laughter. And he comes to the conclusion that trying to be happy, to have joy, is a meaningless and pointless endeavor. It's interesting to think about laughter for a moment, because laughter always has both a time when we should laugh and an object, something that we laugh at. And as Solomon continues to look at life, he's going to continue to remind us that the things that we find funny and the things that we laugh at aren't really that significant, aren't that lasting, aren't that interesting, especially in light of the tragedies and the sorrow and the pain and the suffering that occurs in our life. But he goes on to pursue the whole question of pleasure by looking at it from different angles of view. He talks about pleasure in terms of drinking wine and experiencing folly. These are just two general ways of saying that he is going to open himself up to investigate the kinds of things that make people happy. But his hypothesis is, even before he begins to explore this in any detail, is that this is going to be a dead-end road. It simply won't be worthwhile to spend your whole life trying to feel good or experience pleasure. Now, Solomon describes this pursuit as he starts in verse 4. He says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. Notice the continuous use of the word I. And this is all done for himself. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born into my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. Because he has the wealth and the influence, he's able to do remarkable things. He's able to take on remarkable projects. He builds houses and vineyards and gardens and parks, reservoirs. He has slaves and he has flocks. Note, all these things are plural. He doesn't have just one of them, he has many of them. He doesn't just do these things once, he does them multiple times. And each time he says, I do this for myself. It's not that he's trying to acquire these things in order to demonstrate something to somebody else. It's that he's trying to find personal fulfillment in being a person that has things, that experiences things, that makes things. And it's a king's prerogative to be able to do the kinds of things that he describes. They're the unimaginable things for most of us. It's like the lifestyles of the rich and famous plus 10, however you might want to describe it. And in a sense then, what Solomon is able to do is he's able to say, look, I have gone down this road ahead of you, and you can learn from my experience. And I'm telling you what I have experienced in my pursuit to understand whether or not I can find significance and happiness and contentment and purpose in life by trying to provide myself with all the pleasures that this world can provide. Now he goes on to describe the kinds of pleasures that he enjoys. He describes them as the delights of the heart of man. So we start reading in verse 8. He says, I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers, and a harem as well. The delights of the heart of man. I became far greater than anyone in Jerusalem before me, and in all this my wisdom stayed with me. Pretty remarkable when you think about it, and somewhat surprising. In a sense, we would think that Solomon, as a king of Israel and someone who had the law and the Old Testament and the wisdom of God, would be smart enough not to walk down some roads. But the history of Old Testament tells us that Solomon made all the mistakes that are described here and lots more. But basically, he is able to have everything that he wants. And he describes everything that he pursues. He talks about being able to have wine, women, and songs, so to speak. Everything that people wish they could have, he is able to have. And he does have. He pursues those things and he possesses them. He experiences them. And so what he's saying to you and I is, I have been where you theoretically think you want to go, and I can tell you that you really don't want to go there. That you won't find real joy. You won't find lasting happiness. In fact, under the sun, everything ends up being pointless and meaningless. Now, we're going to find out why a bit further as we continue our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. And he'll give us a few concluding thoughts here as we go to the 10th verse. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Yet when I had surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. A remarkable conclusion for a guy to come to. He basically says to us three things. I operated as if I had no restraints. I had the power and influence and the wealth to do whatever I wanted to do, and I did whatever I wanted to do. All the things that people would consider to be pleasurable, all the things that they think would make them happy, I did those things. And what I found was that I ended up with no substantial reward for my energy and effort. Sure, there were pleasures to be experienced, there were rewards of some kind to be gained, but they weren't significant, they weren't lasting, and they weren't able to satisfy the more fundamental question of what is the purpose of my life, and how should I trade away my days? What kind of person should I be, and what does the meaning of my life amount to? He says that he found that there were no lasting results. He describes this in a very picturesque way. He says it was as if I was chasing the wind. I don't know if you can imagine anything more tiresome, more pointless than trying to catch the wind. And Solomon says, look, I have walked down this road of life. I have pursued pleasure as the most significant thing in life. I have pursued pleasure as a means for achieving and finding purpose and significance in life. And I have found that this too is meaningless.